Strategy 17, Personal Correspondence as a Primary Source by Charli and Taylor. We're going to start off with the introduction. A written correspondence, such as letters and postcards, can support students in learning about their past in a personal, relevant manner. These primary sources provide students with an insight into the past and the opportunity to develop empathy and a greater understanding of a historical event through a first-person narrative, as well as aid in a development of historical perspective. When primary sources are difficult to understand or a poor match for a child's developmental level, it is unlikely that the quality learning experience will occur. It is also important to incorporate items that students will be able to connect with personally and find interesting. Using postcards or letters is a way to bring primary source data into the classroom in a way that is relevant and understandable to students. They also will allow students to explore a role of bias in primary sources and how to use that bias as information rather than discard the source altogether.
Why do personal experiences matter in student learning? So some personal experiences that matter in student learning is because they provide students with a connection into what they are learning. So first-person accounts of historical events cause the students to connect on a deeper level to what they're reading about. So if, for example, if a student is reading about migration across the United States through the Pilgrims, they will likely have a deeper connection to it using a postcard or a first-hand source from a person that's close to their age, rather than simply reading out of a textbook. Also, postcards use insights into the past to offer an opportunity to develop empathy.
What does a lesson centered around postcards look like? It looks like making observations, analyzing postcards, making inference based on data, and communicating explanations and interpretations. Reading postcards from long ago can provide us with information on lifeways of the past. Leading a class discussion with questions such as, what can you tell from the picture about when the postcard was sent? Does the image show a city or a natural location? Do the students see anything in the image that reminds them of their own city? Using a transcript so students can read what the message said, but allowing the students to observe their original handwriting for the context. Open discussion, data sheets, recording the discoveries from their data sheets, and then having students create their own postcards are what a lesson could look like using postcards in the classroom.
That is so interesting. Do you think that having a transcript is the same level of depth and the same engagement level as having the actual handwriting?
I think that if you have both, they can really compare and better understand what the postcard is saying, rather than trying to read somebody's handwriting that is not very well written.
I agree. So how can you modify the strategy for some children of different ages? So kindergarten and second grade are typically emergent readers, and they might have a very hard time learning to read difficult handwriting. And some of this handwriting involves cursive or very flowery handwriting that children don't encounter on a daily basis. So some options for students that really struggle to read this, but that you still want to include in a great activity such as postcard exploration, is to conduct the activity with some adult helpers so they're able to read the postcards. And you could also lead a group discussion rather than just have independent work. Lastly, you could have students that send each other work from different parts of the country and have their handwriting very easy to read and very child-centered language that would be very accessible to kindergarten through second grade students.
Love that idea.
Thank you. And then third through eighth grade usually is able to decipher handwriting. But these students, as they get older, they might have to have some help have allowing the activity to go more in depth, such as writing on the board, what does this mean? What else was going on during this time? And just helping them to make deeper connections to postcards and events that were happening during that time period.
What about English language learners? How does this apply to them? Using more fluent in conversational vocabulary rather than academic vocabulary, students will likely encounter words that they are familiar and better understand the lesson. Working in groups, supporting each other with reading and comprehension, shortened length of these documents is a large advantage. So students aren't looking at a bunch of unknown material.
I love that idea. So what kind of accommodations should be made for some special needs students? So some students that have cognitive difficulties may have a very large difficulty in reading personal handwriting, more so than their peers. So what you can do in order to help this is to create a typed version of the message using an easy to read font. And that's so beneficial for a lot of these students that struggle with issues such as that. Also, the students that struggle with motor skills disabilities might really benefit from placing the postcard in a plastic sleeve, so they are able to grab the postcard and turn it over with more ease rather than just having this little postcard sitting on their desk.
I think that putting a postcard in a plastic sleeve is a great idea, but you can use that in many different things, activities in your classroom if you're using flashcards or anything like that.
Exactly. It makes it a lot more accessible for the students that struggle with that.
Yeah, I honestly never thought about that. How to assess a postcard section. In the conclusion of the activities, students will be able to make careful observations of postcards, analyze the message and image it from the postcard, make inferences about the sender and receivers of the postcard, communicate interpretations through the postcard creation. Here's an example of the rubric that was in our book to evaluate the postcards activities.
I think that's such a great way to evaluate something that's as abstract as this. I think it's really hard for some teachers to think about how we assess such a broad, such a in-depth activity that we typically don't see.
I agree.
So what can a historical postcard lesson evolve into? So one idea that was provided by our book is postcard pen pals. So this essentially means that a child gets connected with a student that is across the country, across the world, but that is their own age, that they are able to send postcards with back and forth. This engages students into realizing what's happening across the country. And also it can educate them about the geography of the mail system. And it's really beneficial for a lot of students to get that kind of mail and to have that kind of connection back to history. Also, children can create their own postcard with a historical event. So for example, if you're learning about Ellis Island in class, students can use that historical event and create a fake postcard that they would send if they were there that talks about what they would hypothetically be going through if they were a member during that time period. Next, we saw in the book that talks extensively about postcard story data sheets. So this means that it helps students with a very specific sheet that asks different questions so they can pull data out of a postcard. And it really helps students connect back to what they should be learning. And also students will use historical empathy to create a series of fictional postcards that share the experience and perspective of a single living person in a historical time. So for example, they might pretend to be Abraham Lincoln and talk about the things that happened in his life. And then they can show what kind of postcards that he would send, and it really connects it back to having their own personal learning aspects and having it connect back to their own person and making a personal experience out of a large historical event.
That's awesome. Going back to the postcard pen pals, who doesn't like getting mail? I think that would be awesome to set up like a whole classroom of pen pals with another classroom from even around the world to create this back and forth like pen pal postcard.
Exactly. That would be so interesting to see.
Standards. Curriculum standards for social studies. Strand 1, culture. Strand 2, time, continuity, and change. Strand 3, individual development and identity. Standards for English language arts. Standards 4, students adjust their spoken, written, and visual language to communicate effectively with a variety of audience and different purposes. Standard 5, employ a wide range of strategies as they write and use different writing process elements appropriate to communicate with different audiences for a variety of purposes.
Awesome. So a large question that we came across in our research is that where can teachers buy postcards? Because you can say all this stuff, and by not having access to historical postcards, that's really can be harming to your classroom if you want to do this activity. So one place that I was looking that you can buy them is as simple as eBay. They're fairly cheap, and you can purchase a great deal of them of all different kinds, and some of them are written on. You can buy ones that aren't written on, and you can really have that historical tie back to different parts of the world. Also, a lot of times secondhand stores have old batches of postcards that you can go in and buy. Flea markets are kind of the same thing, and if you don't want to buy them, there's a great online collection that's put together by a library in Illinois that has a lot of historical postcards, and this whole thing is on a Padlet that I will include a picture of in our video, the QR code for that Padlet, and you can click on this resource, and you can click on a ton of other resources for using this in your future classroom. Overall, I really hope that you choose to include this in your future classroom, as it is a great and beneficial method for having a postcard and personal correspondence as in your classroom.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.